What happens when a seasoned journalist refuses to play nice with royalty and decides to ask the questions everyone's been thinking? What we witnessed on Good Morning America was nothing short of a masterclass in journalism. As George Stephanopoulos systematically dismantled Prince Harry's carefully crafted narrative, leaving the Duke of Sussex visibly rattled and scrambling for answers. This wasn't your typical royal puff piece. This was a reckoning years in the making. Before we dive into this absolute demolition, make sure you subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think about how this all played out. Because trust me, you're not going to believe how this unfolds. The tension was palpable from the moment Prince Harry walked onto the Good Morning America set. George Stephanopoulos, known for his no-nonsense approach to interviewing, sat across from the Duke with a stack of notes and what appeared to be a very specific agenda. The pleasantries were brief, almost perfunctory, before Stephanopoulos launched into what would become one of the most uncomfortable royal interviews in recent memory. "Your Royal Highness, thank you for joining us," Stephanopoulos began. His tone was measured, but carried an undercurrent suggesting this wouldn't be the softball interview Harry might have expected. "I want to start with something that's been bothering a lot of people. You've made numerous public statements about wanting privacy for your family. Yet, you've written a best-selling memoir, appeared in a Netflix documentary series, and now you're here promoting another project. How do you reconcile that contradiction?" Harry's smile faltered slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Well, George, I think there's a difference between sharing our truth and having our privacy invaded by the tabloid press. We're taking control of our narrative rather than letting others write it for us." "Taking control of your narrative," Stephanopoulos repeated, leaning forward slightly. "That's interesting phrasing, because from where I sit, it looks like you're monetizing your family drama while simultaneously complaining about media attention. You can't have it both ways, can you?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Harry shifted in his seat, clearly not expecting such directness so early in the interview. "I don't think that's a fair characterization, George. We're simply trying to set the record straight after years of lies and misinformation." "Set the record straight," Stephanopoulos nodded. "Let's talk about that. In your book, you made some very serious allegations against your family members. You accused your brother of physically attacking you, suggested your stepmother leaked stories to the press, and painted your father as emotionally distant and manipulative. These aren't just setting the record straight. These are character assassinations of people who, by your own admission, can't publicly defend themselves due to royal protocol. Don't you see how that's fundamentally unfair?" Harry's jaw tightened. "Those weren't attacks. They were honest accounts of what happened. I have a right to tell my story." "You absolutely have that right," Stephanopoulos agreed. "But rights come with responsibilities. When you're a public figure making public accusations, don't you have a responsibility to consider the impact of your words? Your grandmother, the late Queen, spent 70 years building the reputation of the monarchy. Your father is now trying to establish his reign with dignity and purpose. Your brother is preparing to be the future king. And here you are, from your mansion in California, lobbing grenades at the institution that gave you everything you have. That institution also caused tremendous pain to my family," Harry shot back, his composure beginning to crack. "My mother died because of the way she was treated by that system." Stephanopoulos paused, his expression softening momentarily. "Your mother's death was a tragedy, and I understand the pain that must cause you even today. But Harry, and forgive me for being blunt, using your mother's memory to justify your current actions, isn't that exactly the kind of emotional manipulation you accuse others of?" The question hit like a physical blow. Harry's face flushed red, and for a moment he seemed at a loss for words. "How dare you?" he finally managed, his voice tight with anger. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about," Stephanopoulos replied calmly. "I've been covering your family for decades. I've seen the good work they do, the sacrifices they make for public service. And yes, I've also seen their flaws and mistakes. But what I'm seeing from you is something different. It's a pattern of behavior that frankly looks like revenge disguised as healing. Harry stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This interview is over. Sit down, Your Royal Highness, Stephanopoulos said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had interviewed presidents and prime ministers. You agreed to this interview. You came here to promote your latest project, and you're going to answer for what you've said and done. The American people deserve to hear this conversation through to the end. Harry hesitated, torn between his instinct to leave and his awareness that walking out would look worse than staying. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of his internal struggle. The studio was silent, except for the hum of equipment and Harry's labored breathing. You want to talk about responsibility? Harry finally said, slowly sitting back down. Let's talk about the responsibility of the press. Let's talk about how they hounded my mother to death, how they've consistently invaded our privacy, how they've printed lie after lie about us. We can absolutely talk about press responsibility, Stephanopoulos agreed. But we're not talking about the tabloids right now. We're talking about you, your choices, your words, your actions. And frankly, the way you're deflecting right now only reinforces my point about your inability to take accountability for your own behavior. The exchange was electric, raw, and uncomfortably honest. This wasn't the polite deference royalty typically received from American media. This was journalism at its finest, holding power accountable regardless of titles or perceived victimhood. Harry was clearly rattled, his carefully rehearsed talking points crumbling under Stephanopoulos' relentless but fair questioning. You talk about accountability, Harry said, trying to regain his footing. Where's the accountability for the institution that drove us out? Where's the accountability for the racism we faced? For the lack of support when my wife was having suicidal thoughts? Stephanopoulos leaned back slightly, studying Harry with the practiced eye of someone who'd heard every sob story, every deflection, every attempt at emotional manipulation from politicians and public figures over the years. Harry, Stephanopoulos said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. I've interviewed survivors of actual persecution, people who fled genuine oppression with nothing but the clothes on their backs. I've spoken to refugees who faced real racism, real threats to their lives and families. And then I look at you, someone who grew up in palaces, had the best education money could buy, served in the military with honor, married the woman you loved in a fairy tale wedding watched by billions, and was given a platform to do meaningful work around the world. Help me understand how that constitutes oppression. Harry's face contorted with frustration. You're minimizing our experience. Just because we had privilege doesn't mean we weren't treated badly. The racism Meghan faced was real. The lack of support was real. The institutional gaslighting was real. Institutional gaslighting, Stephanopoulos repeated slowly, as if testing the words. That's a very serious accusation, Stephanopoulos said evenly. Gaslighting is a form of psychological abuse where someone makes you question your own reality. Can you give me a specific example of how the royal institution made you or your wife question your own reality? Harry paused, clearly not expecting to be asked for specifics. Well, when we raised concerns about racist coverage in the press, we were told we were being oversensitive. When Meghan expressed that she was struggling with her mental health, she was told to just get on with it. Who told you these things specifically? Stephanopoulos pressed. Names, Harry. If you're going to make these accusations on national television, you need to back them up with facts. I can't name specific people, Harry stammered. That would be inappropriate. Inappropriate? Stephanopoulos' eyebrows lifted. You've already named your brother, your father, and your stepmother in your book. You've detailed private conversations, family arguments, and personal moments. But now, suddenly, you're concerned about inappropriateness? That seems rather selective, doesn't it? Harry's composure was visibly cracking. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead despite the cool studio air. That's different. Those were my personal experiences. And this isn't? Stephanopoulos shot back. You just accused an entire institution of psychological abuse, but you won't provide any evidence to support that claim. Do you see how that undermines your credibility? The silence that followed was deafening. Harry looked like a deer caught in headlights, realizing too late that he had walked into a trap of his own making. This wasn't a friendly chat show where his celebrity status would protect him from tough questions. This was serious journalism, and he was completely out of his depth. Let's talk about your wife's mental health struggles, Stephanopoulos continued, his tone sharpening. You've both spoken publicly about Meghan's suicidal thoughts during her time as a working royal. That's clearly a serious issue that deserves compassion and support. But I have to ask, if she was genuinely having suicidal thoughts, why didn't you take her to a hospital? Why didn't you seek immediate professional help? Instead, you went to a charity event that very evening. How do you explain that decision? Harry's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. This was clearly a question he hadn't anticipated, and it struck at the heart of one of his most emotionally charged talking points. It's complicated. You don't understand the pressures we were under. Help me understand, then. Stephanopoulos leaned forward, his journalist instincts fully engaged. Because from where I sit, if my spouse told me they were having suicidal thoughts, nothing, and I mean nothing, would be more important than getting them help immediately. Not royal duties, not public appearances, not protocol, nothing. So either this wasn't as serious as you've made it out to be, or you failed in your most basic duty as a husband. Which is it? The question hung in the air like a sword over Harry's head. The cameras captured every twitch, every flicker of emotion, every sign of how unprepared he was for this level of scrutiny. His handlers, sitting just off camera, looked increasingly uncomfortable as they realized their carefully crafted victim narrative was being dismantled by a professional with decades of experience separating truth from spin. That's not fair, Harry finally managed, his voice trembling. You're twisting things around. I'm not twisting anything, Stephanopoulos replied matter-of-factly. I'm asking logical follow-up questions to the claims you've made publicly. If you can't answer them, maybe you should consider whether those claims were accurate in the first place. Harry tried to regain his composure, straightening his shoulders and forcing confidence he clearly didn't feel. George, I came here in good faith to have a conversation about important issues. Mental health, racism, institutional reform. But you seem more interested in playing gotcha journalism than having a meaningful dialogue. Stephanopoulos smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the controlled smile of a predator who just heard his prey make a fatal mistake. Gotcha journalism? Harry, everything I'm asking you about comes directly from your own public statements, your own book, your own documentary. I'm not ambushing you with secret recordings or unnamed sources. I'm simply asking you to explain and defend things you've said yourself. If that feels like gotcha journalism to you, maybe the problem isn't with my questions. The observation landed with devastating precision. Harry had no response because there was no response. He had been caught in the fundamental contradiction of wanting to control the narrative while avoiding accountability for it. He wanted the platform and the sympathy without having to defend the accuracy or fairness of his claims. Let's talk about your military service, Stephanopoulos continued, sensing blood in the water. You've spoken movingly about your time in Afghanistan, about serving alongside people who didn't care about your royal status. That's admirable. But you also revealed in your book that you killed 25 Taliban fighters, that you saw them as chess pieces rather than people. Military experts have criticized that as dangerous and irresponsible. How do you respond to veterans who say your comments put current service members at risk? Harry's face went pale. This was another instance where his oversharing had created serious consequences he hadn't considered. Those comments were taken out of context. I was trying to process the trauma of war. Taken out of context? Stephanopoulos pulled out a copy of Harry's book. You wrote, and I quote, "So my number is 25. It's not a number that fills me with satisfaction, but nor does it embarrass me." How exactly is that taken out of context? You literally kept a kill count like it was a video game. Harry's hands were shaking now. You don't understand what it's like in combat. You don't understand the psychological mechanisms soldiers use to cope. You're absolutely right. I don't, Stephanopoulos acknowledged. But I've interviewed hundreds of veterans over the years, and not one of them has ever spoken about their service the way you did. Most consider it deeply inappropriate and disrespectful to the memory of those who died. Were you thinking about the families of those 25 men when you decided to share that detail with the world? The question was a knockout blow. Harry looked genuinely stunned, as if it had never occurred to him to consider the human cost of his revelations beyond his own therapeutic needs. His privilege and self-absorption were on full display, and there was no way to spin it otherwise. I think we need to take a step back here, Harry said desperately, his voice cracking as he tried to regain control of the rapidly unraveling interview. This feels like an attack rather than an interview. Stephanopoulos set his notes down deliberately, fixing Harry with a look that had made presidents uncomfortable. Harry, this is exactly what accountability looks like. You've spent years making serious accusations against your family, your country's institutions, and even your fellow service members. You've profited enormously from these accusations, but apparently you expected to do all of this without ever having to defend or explain your claims to anyone who might actually push back. That's not how journalism works, and frankly, that's not how integrity works either. Harry's breathing was becoming increasingly labored. The confident prince who had walked onto the set had been completely stripped away, revealing something far less flattering underneath. You're being deliberately hostile. This isn't fair, Harry said, his composure slipping. What isn't fair, Stephanopoulos replied with surgical precision, is using your platform to destroy people who can't fight back while positioning yourself as the victim. What isn't fair is making millions of dollars off family trauma while claiming you just want privacy. What isn't fair is comparing your privileged life to actual persecution while real victims of oppression struggle in silence. So, let me ask you directly. Do you feel any responsibility for the damage your words have caused? The question hung in the air like a challenge Harry couldn't meet. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came. The silence stretched, growing more uncomfortable with every passing second. I was just trying to heal, he finally whispered. At whose expense? Stephanopoulos shot back. Your brother's reputation, your father's reign, your stepmother's dignity, the monarchy's stability, the military's morale? Harry, healing doesn't require destroying everyone around you. Healing doesn't require profiting off pain. Real healing means taking responsibility for your own actions and choices. Harry's face flushed with anger and humiliation. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what I've been through. Stephanopoulos leaned forward, his voice rising slightly for the first time. Harry, you grew up as one of the most privileged people on the planet. You had every advantage, every opportunity, every door open to you. Yes, you lost your mother tragically, and that's heartbreaking. But millions of people lose parents and don't spend the next 25 years using that pain as an excuse to hurt everyone who tries to help them. The words hit Harry like blows. He was visibly shaking now, his carefully constructed public persona in ruins. You're being cruel, he said. I'm being honest, Stephanopoulos corrected. And if honesty feels cruel to you, Maybe that says something about how far you've drifted from reality. Let me ask you something else. In all of your tell-all interviews, your documentaries, your book, your podcast appearances, have you ever once acknowledged that you might have been wrong about something? Have you ever apologized for anything? Taken responsibility for any mistake or poor decision? Harry stared at him blankly, unable to respond, because the answer was obvious to everyone watching. He had spent years presenting himself as perpetually wronged. Never wrong. Your silence is answer enough, Stephanopoulos continued relentlessly. You know what that tells me? It tells me you're not interested in healing, growth, or accountability. You're interested in revenge, and you've found a way to make that revenge profitable. That's not true, Harry protested weakly, though even he seemed to hear how hollow it sounded. Then prove it, Stephanopoulos challenged. Right here, right now. Acknowledge one thing you got wrong. Apologize for one unfair accusation. Show me you're capable of the self-reflection that real healing requires. The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. This was Harry's moment to salvage something, to show humility, grace, some glimmer of the man he claimed to be. Instead, he sat there in stunned silence, his expression cycling through anger, confusion, and panic. I don't have to prove anything to you, he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. You're absolutely right, Stephanopoulos agreed. You don't have to prove anything to me, but you should probably prove something to yourself. To your wife, your children, the family you've spent years attacking, and the millions of people who've supported you despite your increasingly erratic behavior. Harry suddenly stood, his movements unsteady and frantic. This interview is over. I'm done, are you? Stephanopoulos asked calmly, remaining seated. Because walking away when things get difficult seems to be your pattern, doesn't it? You walked away from your military career when it got challenging. You walked away from your royal duties when they required sacrifice. You walked away from your family when they tried to help you. And now you're walking away from this conversation the moment you're asked to defend your actions. Do you see the pattern here, Harry? Harry stopped mid-stride, turning back with fury in his eyes. How dare you psychoanalyze me on television? I'm not psychoanalyzing you, Stephanopoulos replied evenly. I'm observing your behavior, here today and over the past several years. And what I see is someone who has never learned to take responsibility, who blames everyone else for their problems, and who runs away whenever they're held accountable. That's not analysis, Harry. That's just pattern recognition. The devastating accuracy of the remark seemed to break something in Harry. His fury gave way to despair. He slumped back into his chair, his head in his hands, as the cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of his collapse. You want to know what I think? Stephanopoulos continued, his tone now almost paternal. I think you're a deeply wounded man who has confused healing with revenge, privacy with publicity, and victimhood with virtue. I think you've surrounded yourself with people who tell you what you want to hear instead of what you need to hear. And I think, deep down, you know that what you've been doing isn't healing you or helping anyone else. Harry looked up, his eyes glistening with what might have been tears or rage. You think you know me better than I know myself. I think I know what I see, Stephanopoulos replied. And what I see is someone who's lost his way so completely he can't even recognize it anymore. The tragedy is, Harry, you still have time to change. You can make amends, rebuild bridges, become the man your mother would have wanted you to be. But that requires courage, humility, and genuine self-reflection. And based on what I've seen here today, I'm not sure you're capable of any of those things. The interview ended with Harry sitting in stunned silence, unable to respond. The confident prince who had entered the studio expecting a friendly platform had been systematically dismantled by a master interviewer who refused to indulge his victim narrative. As the cameras stopped rolling, Harry remained slumped in his chair while Stephanopoulos calmly gathered his notes. The contrast couldn't have been starker. One man had shown professionalism and journalistic integrity. The other had been exposed as exactly what his critics claimed: a privileged narcissist masquerading as a wounded victim. This wasn't just an interview. It was a masterclass in real journalism. Stephanopoulos had done what the British press never quite managed to do: strip away the carefully constructed narrative and force Harry to confront the reality of his own behavior. The result was devastating, illuminating, and absolutely necessary. So, what did you think of this systematic takedown? Did Stephanopoulos go too far? Or was this the kind of accountability public figures should face? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more analysis of the moments when journalism truly does its job.